My first brush with systems, with using a process to get things done, wasn't really school. What I learned there was to be more organic. Pick things that are easy to understand, then I don't have to bother learning. And that stood me in great stead at school. It didn't put me in the top of the class, but it did put me in the university going stream, so that I learned biology, science, maths, and I could just figure my way out through school, and that suited me fine. But then I got to nursing, and there was a lot more. There was more at stake. There was professional responsibility. There were ethics to be met, and suddenly I had to learn. So I started taking an interest in frameworks, things that I could hang my knowledge on, things that I could use to climb up to where I wanted to be. And these were then systems. Now, the two big systems I learned from nursing, the one I use today, which is the basic scientific process, 4 steps: assess, plan, implement, evaluate. And then you start again. And evaluate and assess are similar. And I taught that when I taught management, because it is so important. Doesn't matter what you do. Before you tackle anything, invest a bit of time in seeing what there is, making a plan, then do it, then check what happened to see whether that plan worked. Simple, but stands everyone in good stead. The second thing I learned was what they called the problem-orientated nursing record. And basically, a nurse's role is to get people back to a position in which they can look after themselves. And that, in fact, was Florence Nightingale's theory of nursing, is allow nature to take its course, but then you've got to put people into a great position. So you had a number of things you had to do. One, you had to pinpoint the problems that you needed to help them repair, whether it was gallstones or whether it was an amputated leg, whatever it was. You had to pinpoint that problem and see, what nursing do I need to do to help the person get back to independence and their own life. But then there were also things which are sort of underlying. For instance, if you're older, your skin is thinner, you're more likely to have bed sores. You don't move as much, you're more likely to have blood clots. If you've got things like high blood pressure or cardiac disease, or you're asthmatic, you're going to have problems associated with that. So you have to assess the patient as a whole, pinpoint their problems, whether it's an acute problem because of an experience they're having now, or whether it's a longer term problem because of their age or chronic illness or whatever. You then manage their care based on their problem. Now, at first, this didn't seem like much of a theory. But I grew to quite like it because it guided me to focusing on what was needed. If we apply it to my life now, I need money. That's the problem. I have no money. How do I tackle it? I then look at what are my options for making money. That's part of my assessment. How can I make money? What can I do? What can I sell that is mine? Whether it's my knowledge, whether it's my clothes, whether it's my time. Short term, how do I get money? But I also need to look at longer term. And that's where I really began to understand there's short term things you can do and longer term things that you can do, so that you have a timeline of successes, of achievements, rather than stumbling from one little win to another little win. So, like I was saying about acute and chronic illnesses on people, we've got short-term and long-term successes for the same problem that we can achieve. So while you're thinking about it, think, if I do something, is it going to be a short-term solution? What can I then do for long-term, or the other way around? So the problem-orientated nursing record became a lovely thing, which I think it was about then I started reading Covey. Franklin Covey is the diary, but Stephen Covey wrote The 7 Habits of Highly Successful People. And he advocated in his diary, which Franklin Covey did, that you really do a lot of planning. And then there's what they call the waterfall or cascading method of planning, where you start out with your vision, break it down into goals, break those goals down into objectives, break those objectives down into short-term targets, and then have some sort of routine to get those things done. Now, problem-orientated nursing record fits in quite nicely with that. But I found it was quite time-consuming. You were writing the same stuff over and over and over. So once I'd qualified as a nurse and I was a nursing sister and I worked at a hospital, I found writing up the daily reports was exactly the same stuff over and over. And I thought, this is silly. Harked back to my school days of how do I get through this as simply as possible? And I came up with something called the top Cardex. Now, Cardex is what we wrote the patient records up on. It was a sort of a folder in which we kept every patient in. And you'd write the same stuff. But I put up something called a top Cardex, which looked at their health and what we needed to target. What were the problems? And I would put categories in. I would say, right, on their skin, on their cardiac, on their immediate problems, what are we aiming at? And I would say we need to do daily baths, or we need to do daily dressing, so there'd be a time, there would be an action associated with it. Then when I came to writing the daily reports, I would just say all care given as on the top Cardex. End of story. But it also gave me during the day something I could look at and say, have we achieved everything? Where are we going? And I could also look at it and say, things have changed. Let me reevaluate the top Cardex, and you would date and sign, this one we're taking out, we're adding in a new one. Or we've succeeded on this, we don't need to do dressings anymore, date and time, here it is. So record keeping, I learnt, while it's very valuable, and from an ethical and legal point of view, you often need to do record keeping. But you can make it a lot simpler. You don't have to write the same stuff over and over, because doing that, you are going to fail. And if you're doing it with other people, they're likely to fail, which really is upsetting when you're trying to be as accurate as possible. So the two things I learned from nursing were the problem-orientated nursing record, which helps you to focus, get very clear goals of what you're trying to do, short-term and long-term. And then the second one, which I've used throughout in training, is what I call RP, assess, plan, implement, and evaluate. And it is the 4-step process of the scientific process. And it just is basically good thinking. And the more you spend on assess and plan, assess and planning, the better your implementation will be. Always evaluate. Something I often fall short on. But you ponder about things and think, oh, that didn't go so well. Oh, I loved that. But let's be realistic. Did I actually achieve everything I wanted to? And those things that I learned in my nursing career stood me in great stead.